to this week's edition of The Fix. I'm your second favourite Novara Media host, Ash Sarkar, and I'm here with Michael Walker.
Potentially your third favourite. Lovely to be here.
We all have such low self-esteem when Dr. Bastano's not around. So this week, do we have a show lined up for you? We are talking about Hitlists, Purges, Labour Party's skullduggery. We're talking about the return of the nasty party. And we're talking about everyone's favourite woman, Margaret Thatcher. Good news, she's still dead. So why don't you take it away, Michael? Because I know there's been a big scandalous story in the Sunday Times this weekend.
So we're going to start with the dramatic and scandalous story that was on
scandal.
the front of the Sunday Times. This Sunday, obviously, it was the Sunday Times. And which is hopefully going to come up. So this told us that there is a hit list of 50 moderate MPs, which allies of Jeremy Corbyn have drawn up, and they are going to use all their force to get them out of Parliament and replace them with people more in line with Corbyn's politics. There was a problem with this story, though, and quite a lot of people noticed this problem, which is that the article's author hadn't seen this list. The source, who the article's author had spoken to, hadn't seen this list. And so here's the evidence on which this splash was based. A source claimed to the journalist, allies of Corbyn have admitted they have a list of MPs they want to get rid of. So the basis of this huge story was that an unnamed source, who's presumably not someone who likes Jeremy Corbyn, otherwise you wouldn't be giving this negative story to the Times on a Sunday or on a Saturday. All they've said is, I've been told by an ally of Corbyn that they have a list. That to me sounds like a lie.
But, I mean, why would you go through so much effort just to chat some shit? It sounds like a lot of work for very little reward.
To be honest, when you're a centrist MP, I don't think leaking a story to the Times is particularly effort-laden. I think there's probably a WhatsApp group by which they communicate on a day-to-day basis about what they're watching on TV, what they're upset about that day, how many people have followed them with follow back pro-EU hashtag.
Is that what you think centrists do with their day?
I think that is what they've got nothing else to do at the moment. They're like yesterday's people and they need to pass the time somehow. Although most sensible people could obviously see that this was a nonsense story, some of the usual suspects did jump onto it. So Luke Akehurst was very proudly retweeting this front page headline. I think he'd given quotes to the story as well. And Neil Coyle himself had said that this was shocking, that the Labour Party was looking inwards when they should be attacking the Tories.
So why do this? Why do this at all? What political gain is there?
Oh, okay, I see. So, sorry, I misunderstood the question the first time.
I was talk me through the logistics of how you leak a story.
So, the analysis is that the Labour Party are quite strong at the moment on policy. The Tory party are quite weak, whereas historically they would have attacked Jeremy Corbyn on seemingly, or what they call extreme policies, to do things like nationalise the railways. Now that's evidently quite a popular policy. The Conservatives are having a very bad time defending their current ideology, particularly with the collapse of Carillion, which has shown, the neoliberal consensus to be a bit of a sham. And so all the right have left to do is talk about Labour internal politics and talk about the culture of the party. So what they're trying to do is make out that Labour is some sort of revolutionary Leninist party with Stalinist purges constantly around the corner, so that even if you like their policies, you should fear them as crazy militants.
As like
basically.
Vicious and vengeful, which I think would be quite sick, actually. Because look, we know that party discipline has been a problem, most notably with the 2016 chicken coup. So wouldn't it actually be quite good to have a hit list of 50 MPs that you want to just, scuttle off into a shipping container?
Don't get me wrong, Ash, there's more than 50 MPs on my hit list. But that's in a terms of that, I don't want them to be MPs next time around, or very peaceful. But it would be irrelevant if anyone has a hit list, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn or whether it's any Momentum activist anywhere, because the reforms that people are advocating for, and this story was especially because some left-wingers got put on the NEC, who have previously expressed interest in mandatory reselection, which would mean making it easier for members to select new MPs before each election. If that does go through as a policy I support, that would give power to members. So whether an MP remains or goes would be down to people in that local area. It has nothing to do with the party leadership. So the reason you'll get deselected is if your members think you're lazy or obnoxious, or potentially if you tried to bring down the elected leader and they weren't very happy about it. But anyway, this will be a bottom-up process. It will probably be quite chaotic. And to be honest, most of incumbent MPs will probably survive because, as we've seen in selections, incumbents with their name recognition and their local connections tend to survive anyway.
But, I mean, just playing, I'm just dressing up in like my centrist drag for a second.
Yeah.
Don't you think that this might split the party? So you have had moderate MPs saying, well, look, if I don't get selected, like, fuck the Labour Party, I'm gonna, vote as an independent, like, screw you guys. And then I'm gonna run as an independent. Doesn't that present a problem?
You're going to like this bit, Ash.
Will I?
Because we did an experiment.
I love an
2017
experiment.
election. We didn't actually do it, but I mean, it functions like an experiment. There was a Labour MP who was deselected. Not deselected by his members this time, deselected by the disciplinary body of the Labour Party because he'd sent suggestive text to a 17-year-old girl.
He's the nonce.
His name was, he'd sent suggestive text to a 17-year-old girl. You can interpret that how you want.
Nonce.
He had... You've thrown me off. He was deselected. And he
ran.
said he'd stand as an independent. And even though you might think, of course, he's not going to get any votes, he's been sending texts to 17-year-old girls, the media did make a bit of a fuss about it. So in The Guardian, they said Labour officials fear that if Danchuk stands as an independent, he could split the party's vote, leaving a possible five-way contest between Danchuk, Lloyd, UKIP, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. So you can imagine if Chris Leslie gets deselected or if John Woodcock gets deselected, we're going to hear all of these stories. They might split the vote and let UKIP or the Tories through. Do you want to guess the result? Do you want to guess what percentage Simon Danchuk got?
Loads.
He got, I think it was 1.3%. It was 883 votes. Labour increased their vote share by 12% to 29,000 votes. So if you want to run as an independent, go for it.
Don't go up against the family.
Yeah, I mean, don't. I'd prefer you not to. I mean, like, you should just stay in the party and be a nice, humble person like everyone else who thinks that sometimes they don't win elections.
In the words of Kim
but will still
Kardashian,
fight
you
the
never
good
go
fight.
up against the family.
Anyway, enough of the centrists.
So, I mean,
We're going to move to the rabid right wing.
we're going to move on to the nasty party because boy, oh boy, is it back, baby.
It's back every week.
I don't think it ever went away. But the Tory eugenics man is angry about reverse racism.
Toby Young again.
No, that one.
John Penrose.
Nope, the other one.
Suella Fernandez?
No, the other Tory eugenics fan.
I can't keep guessing, Ash. Tell me which one.
Ben Bradley, Conservative Party Vice Chair for Youth, because nothing says fresh, youth-orientated thinking like I love eugenics. But he finally started his political fight back, which we all love to see. After it was revealed last week that Bradley had expressed some less than savoury opinions, including suggesting public sector workers who are unhappy with the pay cap should just leave their jobs.
Which wouldn't actually work because wages have stagnated under the Tories for the private sector as well.
Don't bring facts to an emotions
Sorry.
fight, Michael. Also suggesting that working class people, who he prefers to call the vast sea of unemployed wasters, should get vasectomies. And last but not least, encouraging, and I quote, police brutality during the London riots and calling on cops to play Splat the Chav. Ben Bradley is now attempting to rehabilitate his image, which we all celebrate. So he's chosen not to go down the populist, cuddly route of, offering free Werther's originals to every granny in the country, or, going green the way that Michael Gove has. No, Bradley, hero that he is taking on the most pernicious form of oppression that exists within our society today.
What's that, Ash?
It is reverse racism, my good man.
Ah, genius!
So, our man is frothing at the mouth with rage because an East Midlands Labour Party conference, kind of hoopla, shindig, I don't know what it is you people do.
That's what we do.
So hoopla. Decided to, in addition to setting a half-price discount for youth tickets, to have a 25% discount for Black and Asian minority ethnic ticket holders. Now, most idiots, like you and me, would look at this and go, well, quite clearly, East Midlands Labour are trying to engage with and support the political participation of a traditionally marginalised group. But that's because we're idiots. And Ben Bradley, the wokest Tory on the block, recognises this policy for what it is, which is nothing less than a form of institutionalised discrimination against white people.
We're talking about reverse racism, aren't we?
We are.
Ash, can you explain to me what reverse racism is? And as a
Melanelli challenge.
I was going to call myself an oppressed majority in this country, not globally, obviously. Should I be worried about reverse racism?
If I have my way, yes. But look, here's the thing about reverse racism. It's a figment. It's a phantom. It's summoned up by white people who have made the classic error. And they think that talking about race is the same thing as perpetuating racism. And look, professing that you don't see colour merely invisibilises injustice. It doesn't eradicate it. Because reverse racism assumes that essentially all things are equal. So racism is kind of a neutral social practice which theoretically anyone can be a victim of. But that's not what racism is. It's not just like any other interpersonal interaction. It's nothing less than the organisation of the human species into those with proximity to power and those without, along the lines of colour and culture. So this plays out in multiple ways, from microaggressions at work to all-out assaults on the street. It affects you in terms of the size of your pay packet, to your likelihood to be in prison, to your access to quality, decent standard healthcare. And obviously race is not the sole determining factor in those issues, but white people on the basis of their race will never be discriminated against in that way. And while I think it is dangerous to collapse race and class into one another totally, they are closely related. So Black and Asian minority ethnic households are twice as likely to be amongst those hardest hit by austerity. And when youth unemployment fell for white people, it increased for Black and Asian minority ethnic youth. And what's more, money can't fully protect you from racism. Even Oprah gets shit, right? Because whether it's on the street or in the papers, people of colour are always made to symbolise the wider ills of society. And when we're successful, we're blamed for the continuing political and economic exclusion of white working class people. And then when we're not successful, that's seen as just more evidence of our own cultural inferiority. And as clumsy as some of these attempts at affirmative action have been in trying to deal with some of these systematic racialized exclusions, like I think this conference should have had an unwaged and low-wage ticket option as well, I think you have to at least acknowledge that continued injustice will not and cannot be solved by continued inaction. And what's more, I think that by demonising people of colour in this way, in order to try and claw back some political relevance, Ben Bradley is actually operating within a much more long-established Tory party tradition. Should we take a break?
Let's take a break.
Over the last 10 years, things have really changed.
Victory for real people.
Us. It's about us. But for all of the darkness, every cause has an effect.
40 students on the roof of Millbank.
Tienen mucha experiencia.
For all the talk of change, the present moment
is really one of crisis.
A crisis of democratic representation.
Of identity.
A climate crisis.
Of a failing economic model which isn't working for most people.
We can't have a media that's beholden to advertisers or the political ambitions of oligarchs.
Which is why, in 2013, we founded Novara Media.
Unlike corporate media, we are funded by our subscribers.
There's no tax avoiders, there's no oil money, and there's no lords. What we're creating is media for you, which quite simply, you make possible.
We're looking to raise £40,000. That will allow us to not only keep on paying our contributors, but give them a little bit more, as well as keep our studio and take our fantastic Novara events nationwide.
To help us get there, go to support.novaramedia.com and give a one-off donation, or even better, sign up for a subscription.
We've already achieved so much, but the truth is, we've barely started.
We're going to delve deeper into the history of Tory racist politics, to put it in very simple terms. We're going to go back to one of the classic Tory characters that we never really talk particularly positively about on Novara Media, but we have even more reason now to have a little go at her. And that's because this week a new book was released. It was the diary by Sir Patrick Wright, who was the top diplomat in the Foreign Office whilst Thatcher was Prime Minister. And he's revealed a number of things.
She's still dead, right?
She's still dead, don't worry. But from beyond the grave, we're hearing some more of the obscene views she held in the 80s and 90s. So these included Thatcher wanted a white-only South Africa. She wanted to push migrants back to the sea. She hated the Germans and disliked men with moustaches because they looked like hairdressers.
I mean, that sounds like coded homophobia to me.
For all the reasons to dislike moustaches, that's not one of the legitimate ones.
Jesus. So we have the kind of unholy trinity of, random like xenophobia, racism, and coded homophobia. Mm-hmm. I mean, for lots of people, idiots mostly, this has come as a surprise that Thatcher was racist.
I'm not sure how many people it's going to come as a surprise, but let's read some of the quotes.
Some of the people of Grantham, maybe.
So we can get the full glory that is Maggie Thatcher. So this isn't her diary, this is the diary of Patrick Wright. So June the 20th, 1986. 1 week before taking over as permanent Undersecretary from Sir Anthony Ackland, we were both invited to lunch with Mrs. Thatcher. She opened the conversation by thrusting a newspaper cutting about Oliver Tambo, who was ANC president at the time, African National Congress, in front of us, saying that it proved we should not be talking to him. She continued to express her views about a return to pre-1910 South Africa with a white mini-state partitioned from their neighbouring black states. When I argued that this would be seen as an extension of apartheid, she barked, "Do you have no concern for our strategic interests?"
I mean, this is even within the pro-apartheid discourses that existed at that time, predominantly within the Conservative Party, arguing for pre-1910 borders is particularly batshit. So I think we've got a map that we can show you and put up on the screen. That's what it would have looked like. The South African Republic there that you have in the middle was originally a Boer state. It takes up what's part of what's known as the Orange Free State and goes up into the Transvaal and I think just dips into the Cape a little bit. It's got like a little bit of a sea coast because obviously you want to be able to export all those lovely apartheid fruit and veggies. But that's just how batshit that policy would have been. It would have taken what was already going on, the establishment of Bantustans, the forced relocation of African people under horrendous conditions, and would have accelerated that even further. That was her idea of a good policy.
And we've got some... So she was also very out of sync with what was mainstream opinion at that time. This was in the middle of a global boycott of South Africa, and she was very proud of this. Actually, we'll start with August the 3rd, 1986, because it gives us a clue of why she might have had such a racist position, quite frankly. So, at a meeting in the PM study in number 10, she again started talking about partition as a solution to South Africa. All her and Dennis's instincts are in favour of the South African whites.
And unsurprising.
Unsurprising. We'll go into unsurprising in 1 second. And then on February the 13th, 1990, so this is 4 years later, the PM continues to bleat about reunification to all her visitors. Sorry, this is about Germany, the first bit. She is also revelling in being the only politician to argue for the lifting of all sanctions against South Africa. So she was revelling in being a global outlier, whilst the rest of the world was coming to a consensus that this system could no longer stay in place, that it was untenable to have an apartheid South Africa where white people completely dominated blacks who were disenfranchised politically. Thatcher revelled in the fact that she wanted it to continue.
And you know why, right?
You're going to tell me why, Ash?
I'm going to tell you why. The reason why Margaret Thatcher was consistently against sanctions and the boycott of South African goods is because her husband, Dennis Thatcher, held extensive business holdings in South Africa. David Cameron also, when the boycott was in place, went on what was known as a fact-finding mission as a student. Even though he claimed not to be pro-apartheid, it was generally seen as a pro-apartheid position to visit South Africa at the behest of the apartheid South African state during that time.
I'd love to see the facts he found out, actually.
Oh, maybe apartheid's bad, but not so bad that I'll speak out against it.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's what he found out.
You got some more facts about how it went deeper into the Tory party at that time, though. Even some figures that we currently are more familiar with than, well, not more familiar than with Thatcher, but have more present power.
So there's
Maggie Thatcher.
Oliver Letwin, who is the current MP for West Dorset. He was a staffer in Thatcher's policy unit. So the Conservative Party's strain of racism went so much deeper than just being pro-apartheid. It was also rigidly applied to domestic politics as well. So 1985, roughly contemporaneous with these diary entries, you had the Broadwater Farm riots, you had the Toxteth riots, uprisings up and down the country. And there were some people, even in the moderate wing of the Conservative Party, who were trying to encourage Thatcher to address some issues of systemic injustice, racism, economic inequality. Oliver Letwin was advising against that. And I'm going to read this quote in full because it's actually, I think, incredibly shocking. The root of social malaise, Letwin wrote, is not poor housing or youth alienation or the lack of a middle class. Lower class, unemployed, white people lived for years in appalling slums without a breakdown of public order on anything like the present scale. Also, that's categorically not true, I'm just going to say. In the midst of the Depression, people in Brixton went out, leaving their grocery money in a bag by the door and expecting to see the groceries there when they got back. Riots, criminality, and social disintegration are caused solely by individual characters and attitudes. So long as bad moral attitudes remain, all efforts to improve the inner cities will founder. Lord Young's new entrepreneurs will set up in the disco and drug trade. Kenneth Baker's refurbished council blocks will decay through vandalism combined with neglect, and people will graduate from temporary training or employment programs into unemployment or crime. This could have been written by Ben Bradley today.
I mean, this is the deepest reaction. So, and it's in direct response, as you say, to people who were advising Thatcher that when you see an inner city riot, maybe there's some economic reality that's underlying that. Maybe that's because of inequality or underprivilege or the fact that people don't have opportunities and they're angry.
Maybe it's because of swamp policing or sus laws. You know, these movements and these critiques were being made at the time.
But they're talking about what are potentially quite conservative solutions to that anyway. It's encourage entrepreneurship in these areas. It's not saying, that's not a particularly left-wing solution. It's progressive for a right-winger. And he's saying, if you encourage entrepreneurship among black people, they will just use those skills to become drug dealers.
And like I said,
it doesn't get any more racist than that. This guy's a current Tory MP.
Current Tory MP. He apologised for the badly worded memo when it was revealed, I should state. I don't think it was the wording of the memo that was a problem. I think it was the underlying political principles. But in terms of those political principles, since the mid-20th century at least, there has been an organised contingent of hard-right racists within the Conservative Party. So in 1961, during the crisis that decolonisation presented to the British ruling class, the Conservative Monday Club was formed. They disbanded in the early 2000s because of lack of membership. But they vociferously defended...
It might be the fate that happens to the Tory party soon.
Come
Fingers
on,
crossed.
Allah.
Sorry, keep telling us about the Monday Club.
They vociferously defended white minority rule in colonial Rhodesia. They opposed Kenyan independence. Notable members included Enoch Powell and a more familiar figure, John Bercow, current Speaker of the House, our beloved current Speaker of the House. And during the Thatcher years, they became particularly obsessed with scrapping the Commission for Racial Equality. They lobbied for the immediate repeal of all race relations laws. They called Oliver Tambo a terrorist, much like Mrs. T, and they opposed the end of apartheid until the bitter end. And
Much like Mrs. T.
Much like Mrs. T. And during the Thatcher years, up until 88, 89, when they had a leadership crisis, they were known as the anchor to the Tory party ship. And even more than this, even more than the Monday Club, you had the Federation of Conservative Students. And they were forcibly disbanded in 1986 because they were an embarrassment to the Tory party. But can we see one of their posters? Can we just put that up on the screen? Hang Nelson Mandela and all ANC terrorists. They are butchers. So, Federation of Conservative Students. Do you want to know who was their head during this time?
I don't want to know, but tell me.
John Bercow again.
Oh.
Now, he insists that he didn't take part in the anti-apartheid baiting, but he was head of the Federation of Conservative Students.
I mean, not taking part is the least you can do. I mean, is there any record of him condemning these actions? Is there any record of him trying to discipline members of the Conservative students who were so blatantly pro-apartheid?
No, not at that time. Not at the time. He's since disavowed it when being pro-apartheid went out of fashion, I guess.
Yeah.
And David Cameron, I think it was.
When even among Conservatives it became an unacceptable position
it got a
to
bit
hold.
uncomfortable. David Cameron said, "Oh, we have a bit of an uncomfortable history with apartheid," and I think that's striking because we were talking about earlier the kind of difference between Cameron's stewardship of the Tory party and Theresa May's is that one of the things that's gone is that rigid media discipline. And now that the Tories are ideologically all at sea, I think in terms of comms and messaging they are as well. So under Theresa May, people who I think under Cameron would have remained controlled or at least on the margins of the Tory party, they are able to quite explicitly and proudly return to those nasty party roots. So Ben Bradley is speaking alongside a chorus of voices who are almost pathological in their hatred of the working class, of Black and Asian minority ethnic people. And, you know, much more quietly than Ben Bradley or Toby Young, you have those two Tory MPs who you mentioned, Suella Fernandez and John Penrose, who opposed integrating the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights into British law because it protected UK citizens too much from things like eugenics. Why do they love eugenics so much?
I mean, I think what we're seeing in the Tory party at the moment is that, well, there's two things, which is that the Tory party has always been and always will be a party full of weirdos. You know, full of weirdos who hate poor people and hate black people. Why else would you join that party? Unless you're really rich. So, I mean, I suppose that's the triad, isn't it?
And, you know, there's a kind of connection between being really rich and having a, you know, pathological hatred of the poor.
There's potentially a connection between all
And the
three of them if
oppressed.
you wanted to do a structural analysis, but that's not what Novara does, obviously. And these are off the leash because, one, because Theresa May is a little bit weaker, and two, because Theresa May has suggested towards some of these policies recently. So her speech about citizens of nowhere was read by many as a bit of a dog whistle.
It was a vuvuzela, my friend. It was not a dog whistle.
Probably a vuvuzela, exactly. And I mean, what you see, and you probably saw this at the end of John Major as well, is that when the Tories are weaker on economics, they turn to their backup, which is race, which is white identity politics.
And so I kind of wanted to bring this up as a political question because we talk a lot about Operation Black Vote. How can you galvanise and get out the ethnic minority vote? Normally for Labour, that's how we're talking about this. I want to switch the dial a little bit. I want to talk about Operation White Vote. And I want to talk about or raise the question of just how effective is racism as a kind of electoral bulwark or safety strategy. Because I'm in two minds about this, and I thought I'd present you with some statistical data, and then because you're the elections guy, you can just take it and
You're
run
on with
with
the
it.
statistics.
Yeah, it's because I have them
I
written
love I'm
down
the
here, my
elections guy.
friend.
That's the nicest way you've ever put the fact I'm into party politics before.
It's because I've just, like, my 2018 New Year's resolution was don't pick on Michael Walker so
Oh,
much.
I love you, Ash.
Oh, don't take it too far. So the reason why I'm bringing it up in this way is because you have to look at the contrast between Conservative Party gains from Labour in 2017 and Labour Party gains from the Conservative, because that story is best told through the very stark racial statistics. So the Conservative Party gained seats like Derbyshire North, Middlesbrough South and Clacton, which all have a very low percentage of ethnic minority people living there. So Derbyshire North is 1.9% Black and Asian minority ethnic, Middlesbrough South 2.5%, Clacton 2.6%. On average, the size of the ethnic minority electorate in seats that they won from Labour was about 4.5%, very, very low. But the average for the seats that Labour gained from the Conservatives was 14%. So if you were, and what world this would be, a Conservative Party advisor, would you be turning to May and saying, look, your one hope at this stage is go hell for leather on getting the white vote?
I think it'd be a very risky strategy. I mean, that was obviously part of their strategy in 2017. I think because they were worried that they'd lost some of the upper middle class because of Brexit, they thought they'd go hell for leather for the white working class. And they thought they could do that. One, with some utterings about an industrial policy which never really came to pass, but more than that, talking about white identity politics. And I think it's apparent that that was less successful than they hoped it would be. So as you've shown, they did increase their vote in some places with a disproportionate number of white people. So it obviously had some effect, it obviously had some success, but it potentially turned off more people than it turned on. And I mean, it's difficult, it's a numbers game, isn't it? Does it, as that strategist, does it turn on more people than it turns off? But I mean, for the left, I mean, what the left can do in this conundrum is what would make that strategist's job even harder is if those people who they're going after who were somewhat disaffected by the political class turned to a Labour Party with a genuine socialist industrial policy, then they would presumably be less inclined to go for the white identity politics. Because I mean, basically what the Tories are doing in this case is to say to people, you are inherently in competition with other people. You as a white person are in competition with the Polish migrant. You're in competition with black people in terms of your status. And so the left can either say, yes, you're in competition, but it's totally fair and just that you might lose. Or the left can say, look, you don't necessarily have to be in competition. We can all have decent housing. We can all have decent healthcare. It's not about you winning or losing. We can all win.
Because when we were chatting about this before we went live, we were talking about this in an American context where a real sense of culture wars in which race played a huge part really disadvantaged liberal, left, progressives. And Trump was very able to capitalise on a very ugly mood that was already there. But I think he was able to do that so effectively for two reasons. One is the demographic composition of the United States is very different from that of the UK, which is why I think that trying to emulate a right-wing culture war strategy in this country will be overall less effective. And two, the American history of that sense of being demographically at siege, under siege by the presence of people of colour, that goes to the very heart of the American Republic from the moment it was established, really. That's the anxiety which shaped the colonisation of the Americas, that's what shaped slavery, that was what shaped Reconstruction and, later Jim Crow South. So it's actually got a much more robust political history. So I do think that there is a measure of hope for, offering that solidly socialist policy platform and hoping that that goes some way to mitigating the attractiveness of white supremacist identity politics. But I do also think you need a socialist anti-racist street movement, which I don't think that we have. I do think that we've got an anti-racist discourse which concerns itself a lot with questions of the culture war. And I understand why that's the case. I often feel that temptation myself. It's incredibly frustrating when you feel that you're in the middle of it. But quite frankly, we need to be marrying it to a material analysis, which is engaging with people's material conditions. Otherwise, we're completely fucked.
We could talk about this for a long time, but I'm just going to agree with you because
Safer.
It's half an hour is up. And this was The Fix. We'll be back on Monday. In between now and then, there'll be plenty of videos coming out from our Facebook page. Check out Paul Mason's article today. He's now a regular contributor every Monday.
We just poached him straight from The Guardian.
Poached him from The Guardian. We're coming for you. We're coming for you, Kath Viner. Anyway, see you next Monday.
And we're going to play you out with our new national anthem.
Ah, yes.
Wearing My Rolex by Wiley. Thank you.
That's when I start promising the world to a brand new girl I don't even know yet. Next thing she's wearing my Rolex.